one of the great frustrations with evangelical apologetics is that there is this constant tendency to overpromise and underdeliver. And I think this is motivated in large part by the fact that much of evangelical apologetics is driven by an existential angst to secure for the quote unquote believer a degree of certainty, of confidence that simply outstrips the evidence to support that degree of confidence. So they're always overselling things and as a result, often distorting the actual evidence, which is often decent, good evidence for a particular aspect of theistic or Christian belief, but they oversell it and end up misrepresenting it to secure the degree of confidence that is simply not warranted by the evidence. Classic example, we're going to take a look at now. This was just posted recently on Twitter by evangelical apologist Nancy Pearcey. So let's take a look. Now, I should say that I've actually seen similar data used in other contexts by evangelical apologists like Del Tackett and the Truth Project. So this is not unique to Nancy Pearcey. This kind of, I'm going to call it misinformation, uh, if not disinformation, gets widely traded among evangelical apologists. So let's look what she says. She says the New Testament documents are much closer to the events they report than any other ancient document. There's far too little time for myths and legends to develop. Now, there is a kernel of truth there. A kernel of truth, for example, that the early reference to the death and resurrection of Jesus that you find in the creedal summary of 1 Corinthians 15, 3 to 5, is too early for that to be a product of legend. You could argue that, and you could do that very credibly. But that's not enough for people like Piercy who have to have the sense that they have to ground confidence in the entirety of the New Testament as an inerrant product. They have to overstate the evidence in a way that just distorts it. And that's what she does here. So look at this graph. It says the reliability of the New Testament compared to other ancient documents. And then she compares, well, Homer's 500 years, Herodotus, Tacitus, etc. They're all hundreds of years, if not thousands, more than 1,000 years. The extant copy is dated that much later than the autograph or the original writing. But when it comes to the New Testament, this graph says the gap between the original autograph of the New Testament and the copy we have of that autograph is 25 years. That's incredible if true, but it's not true. There are two fundamental distortions here that makes this misinformation and, depending on the level of intent or awareness, potentially disinformation. The first one is the conflation of New Testament with a particular writing of the New Testament, namely the Gospel of John. And the second distortion here is playing off on a misunderstanding of what a copy is or what a manuscript is in textual criticism. So let me say a word about each one of these. So first of all, um, the move from Gospel of John to New Testament. I believe it's pretty clear to me that the most likely candidate for what this graph that Piercy is promoting, that what it is actually referring to is the Gospel of John, not the New Testament, because we have a copy of a manuscript of the Gospel of John from about the year 125 to 130. The Gospel of John was written probably between 90 and 95. So right there, first thing we can see is that she's already overstating. It's not 25 years, it's closer to 35 to 40 years. Still amazing, but not 25 years. Unless, ironically, she dates the Gospel of John into the second century, which I don't think she's going to want to do because she wants it to be written by probably John the Apostle in his late old age. That's not going to happen, right? If it's like 105 Common Era. So anyway, she's overstated the date, but the main thing we can see here is she's referring to the Gospel of John. That is the manuscript, but that is a clear bait and switch. She's gone from talking about the New Testament as an autograph, a collection, which is actually 27 different writings, and saying, no, actually, we're just talking about the Gospel of John. She doesn't tell you that, but that's what she's referring to. It's the Gospel of John. The next thing that she trades off of is a misunderstanding among lay people as to what is a manuscript or a copy of a manuscript. The best way to illustrate this point is to show you the Gospel of John copy that she is referring to here implicitly through this graph. Let's take a look at it. All right, behold in all its glory, P52 from the John Rylands Library in England. This is the copy of the Gospel of John that I believe that graph is referring to. So this is that text, the copy of the manuscript of the Gospel of John that dates around the year 125 Common Era, so probably around 35, 40 years after the Gospel of John was written. See, what Piercy doesn't tell you is that when she talks about copy, she's not talking about a complete copy of the Gospel of John, let alone the New Testament. But within textual criticism, any fragment of a copy of an original manuscript or of a manuscript, any copy of any fragment of it, no matter how small, is referred to as a manuscript or a copy. So here we have a manuscript from the Gospel of John, and it's just a tiny fragment. It has a little bit of writing on both sides, and that's it. So that is what we have 25 to 40 years after the Gospel was written. And again, don't get me wrong, that's pretty amazing stuff. Like it's really impressive that you've got a gap of like 35, 40 years from the original writing of the Gospel of John or the autograph to this fragment of a copy, this tiny postage stamp size fragment of a copy. When you then take this good information and then you now spin it and misrepresent it on two counts by suggesting this is a copy of the New Testament and by implying for the average lay reader or interpreter that this is a reference to the entirety of the manuscript of the of the New Testament. What you do is you fundamentally misrepresent it, and this now moves from being important information and some degree of evidence for something. It moves from that to just being misinformation, if not disinformation. That is a classic example of how evangelical apologists misrepresent good evidence and thereby distort it. And once you realize they're doing that, all that does is completely undercut the credibility of that evangelical apologetic enterprise.